Barbados experienced a freak system during the night of Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. To some, it was seen as a dry run for this year's Atlantic hurricane season, which is predicted to be well above average. The weather caught many Barbadians by surprise as the warning was only issued when the system was already on the island's doorstep. The end result: hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to several homes, fallen trees. The electricity supply and water supply were also disrupted, in some instances for a few days. On this one-on-one, we look at the state of our buildings and infrastructure and whether they can stand up to the average storm. And a very good evening to you. I'm Lisa Lord, and joining me is the president of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers, Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Brown. Sir, thank you for joining us.
And thank you, Lisa, for giving us this opportunity to share with the Barbadian public some concerns that we have, especially coming into this year's hurricane season.
You're most welcome, and that's actually where I want to start. Now, BAPE released a statement over the course of the last few days indicating that the freak weather system that occurred showed us the island is not ready and remains very vulnerable. Now, let's look at the level of damage we saw from that minor system. Close to 100 homes were damaged, with at least 18 needing to be totally rebuilt. How concerned are you?
Overly concerned, and this is precisely why we actually issued this statement. Not that we didn't have concerns before. We have actually consecutive years issued warnings about our lack of preparedness from our perspective in Barbados. But this year, as you highlighted, this almost non-system in comparison to the kind of systems that we've become accustomed to was able to cause quite significant damage in Barbados. It is a matter of grave concern. You notice that we touched on the need for building codes, but there's a range of concerns that we have relating to our preparedness. And what that system did was to highlight to us, and we hope to everybody in Barbados, that we need to do something differently. And we're hoping to talk about that.
No, I'm not sure if you were up during the night when we had that enormous amount of lightning, but did you expect in the morning hours when we went out and we did the assessments that you would have that level of damage?
Absolutely not. We didn't expect it. But to be quite honest, on reflection, I can't say that we were surprised because, as I said, for the last couple of years, 2 years ago, we had a seminar where we got all our engineers together and we kind of reflected on where we were and what the threats were. And the problem with Barbados, of course, is that we have been so lucky. So we have gone through a fairly significant period of no serious impacts. Now, what that means is that much of our housing stock is old. It is untested, whereas in many of our neighboring countries, they would have experienced fairly significant hits. They would have rebuilt with hurricanes in mind, and therefore you would expect that their housing stock would be more prepared for events like this. We in Barbados, we have not had that experience, and we have become fairly complacent. So that it may not be terribly surprising that there was more damage experienced from that small event than would normally be expected in a prepared country. But what it has to do to us is to highlight a need for a significant change in our attitude towards preparedness.
And you mentioned that in the statement as well, that we're not taking mitigation seriously enough.
We seem to be building our performance, our future on luck, on the presumption that it is always going to miss us. It is always going to deviate to the right or to the left or lose strength before it impacts Barbados. And that may well be the case in 99% of the time. Unfortunately, it only takes one hit to take a country like Barbados back 20, 30 years. And I think it is important that everyone in Barbados come to understand the level of exposure, the potential for significant damage and for taking this country way, way back in developmental terms, and the need to put as many systems in place preemptively to minimize such an exposure.
Now, let's look at your biggest concern, water versus wind. Is there a big concern regarding one versus the other?
No, they're both damaging. But as we saw from the experienced in the Bahamas in 2019, water can be devastating. I mean, the storm flows, right? The high waves and the storm surges has the potential on the coastline to do devastating damage. And Barbados is, I mean, we have been so lucky that we have no idea of the level of exposure and the potential for damage. So yes, from both water and from wind, there is potential for significant damage.
Right, but I was looking at it from the perspective of our topography, and then how we build our homes. If there's one versus the other in terms of a disadvantage.
I find it difficult. Maybe my civil and structural experts may be able to get into those kind of details. But obviously on the coastline, the potential damage from water will be very, very significant. We see that every year with the wave action on the coast. And on the inland areas, the wind damage will be the major consideration. But in both cases, unless there's adequate preparation put in place up front to mitigate the potential damage from these two forces, the end result can be devastating, whether it's from the water on the coastline or from the wind on the inland areas. So in both cases, we are equally concerned at BAP that we are not adequately prepared.
Is there any one particular system, for instance, that stands out in terms of the level of damage it did in Barbados over the years?
I guess Janet would be the one that stands out, and that goes to the root of our problem. Mm-hmm. It has been so infrequent, and Janet has been so long ago. I mean, most people live in Barbados don't know what Janet is.
Correct.
Have not experienced it, and those who experience it are so old that it's probably a fading memory. Compare that to Dominica, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's a completely different experience, and because of the impact of global warming, it appears that these systems are becoming significantly more powerful, far more unpredictable, and doing things that they never did before. We are seeing systems move from category 1 to 5 practically overnight. I mean, the system that you referenced the other day, the very minor system.
Yeah.
People went to sleep expecting it was going to be just a normal night, and you woke up the next day with 100 houses damaged. This is the kind of world in which we live in. And and our key point, which I want to re-emphasize over and over, is that what we did for the last 20, 30, 40 years cannot be acceptable for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Things have changed dramatically, and we need to have commensurate changes in our hurricane preparedness systems for Barbados.
Well, let's look then at our public infrastructure, our roads, potable water systems, electricity supply. And with the system a week ago, some areas lost power in some instances for up to 3 days.
For a very minor system. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, it could have been a lot worse. Mm-hmm. Many of us don't understand the complexities of our public infrastructure.
Right.
The electricity system, for example, that was built up over decades of hard work, of planning, of intricate systems that gradually reached the stage of performance that we have today. That can be significantly impacted overnight in a storm to the extent, in many cases, in Dominica, for example, there were communities without electricity for, a year after the storm. These infrastructural systems are delicate, they are complex, and they're not easily replaced, especially in the aftermath of a hurricane when everything is out of whack. It's difficult enough to maintain in normal circumstances when you can order equipment, order supplies, and actually plan the repairs. Consider the difficulty of doing it when there's no electricity, there's no running water, everything is a mess, there's no communication, the phone is not working, and you're trying to rebuild your basic infrastructure. This is something that we need to think about now, while we can make sensible plans and not leave it till the day after the storm, when you can't even talk to one another. Mm-hmm. And this is the point this is the point we're actually trying to drive home from BAP.
But how do you make those systems more resilient?
With creative planning. This is something that has to be done way in advance. So this is what worries us. This is not something we can do in May because the system is starting, because the hurricane season starts in June. This is something we have to plan now for 5, 10, 15 years down the road. It's something we should have started 5 years ago for now. We didn't. And this is why we are always talking about the building code. A building code is a really special piece of legislation. Basically, it establishes minimum standards, taking into consideration the potential threats. This is just what we're talking about. If we know we live in a region where you can experience winds of 150 miles per hour, it behoves you up front to spend a few extra dollars to build a home that will stand up after such an experience, rather than save those dollars and then every 5 or 10 years you have to build that home over and over and over again, possibly losing lives in the process, having serious injuries, incurring significant hospital costs because of damage, loss of possessions, and all the other things that can accrue from not having a solid envelope as a home or as a protective area. So basically, there are 4 main phases of disaster preparedness. And the very first one is called mitigation. And mitigation is what you like to call common sense. It is way upfront planning. And this is the answer to your question, how you deal with protecting your infrastructure, for example. Take the electricity system. Electricity system is fundamental to almost everything that we do in Barbados. It is actually the energy of the country. Mm-hmm. It is what powers everything that we do. Our electricity system is largely exposed to the weather by poles that we have stuck all. Now this worked well for us for a century, but this is 2030. And for years now we knew that the system would be far more resilient if it resided underground.
Underground, yeah.
Of course, it's also far more expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you make your decisions based on short-term return on investment, you will continue to put poles up because it's about 1/10 of the cost. But in the long run, if you understand risk management and you understand the risks you're taking by having your whole infrastructure exposed, it may make sense on an annual basis, for example, to move 5% of the system underground, 5% next year. And every year you actually reduce your exposure without incurring the full capital cost, which we agree is higher than. But we have not been doing anything like that. That requires a long-term national plan so that we could say, for example, that 20 years from now, we will move to a situation where 50% is underground. So we know even after a storm, half of the island, click, and you're back on. And then we can start building from there. We are in a position now where 20, 30, 40 years after we recognize the value of going underground, we are still 90%. We have not been moving in a positive direction. Now that is a lack of vision. And that is the kind of concern that we have at BAP. We are not saying that tomorrow we should find $2 billion to move everything underground. We know that that's not practical. But what we need is a plan that says that by 2040, 60% will be underground. And to do that, we will put 5, 10, 15, 20, so that we all know where we're going. And if something happens in the meantime, you understand you're still exposed, but to a lesser degree because you would have made some conversion, made some movement in the right direction. This is the kind of mitigation that we would like to see in place. It calls for national planning. It calls for legislation that establishes minimum, so that you don't let people go around building houses that will blow down because somebody puffed, which is essentially what happened the other night. In comparison to what could happen in 2021 with the kind of systems we're seeing, that was a puff. And if a puff is going to cause that kind of damage, Lord help us if we get unlucky in any particular year.
So I want to go back to the building code in just a second, but I know that in your statement, and I did mention, you're concerned about the state of our roads.
Right. We are very concerned about the roads. We are very concerned about the bridges. We are very concerned about drainage. And not to pick on the roads, but the roads this have been a special bane to us at BAP. We actually had a number of seminars to deal with the whole question of managing potholes, for example, the whole question of transportation, the congestion on the roads, the apparent lack of planning. I mean, the situation where there's just a drizzle and pedestrians cannot walk the road in peace without having to wade through puddles of water, splashed up by vehicles. I mean, the truth is, in 2021, this should not be the case in a country that, like Barbados, where we have invested the kind of resources in education and in human resource development. There are not many countries anywhere in this world that have made the kind of investments that Barbados has made per capita in education and in human development since the 1970s, for example. I mean, I would like someone to show me a country that really outdid us. And in fact, in the early stages, I'm pretty sure that we were at the top of the heap when it comes to providing free education and human resource development as a small country. But I'm not sure that we can see the results in terms of the quality of the roads that we have, in terms of the plans that we have in place for maintaining our infrastructure. And this concerns us. And it's not, when I first became an engineer many years ago, the problem we had in Barbados is that there were not many engineers. I never ever applied for a job. When I qualified, I could pick any job I wanted. That was the honest truth. Our problem then was lack of engineering resources, people who were trained to solve problems. I can tell you now, right, that we have in Barbados between 600 to 800 people fully qualified to be engineers who are not being utilized as engineers. Well, if we were to talk about that, that'd be a whole other subject. So let's stick to disaster preparedness. But it is not for lack of resources, for human resources. We have people, we have expertise, we have people who we spent lots of resources to train. What we have not put in place is the systems to utilize these talents to make our systems work. That is what is missing.
You mentioned concerns about our drainage system as well.
Same as the roads, right? So again, and I measure by results. We measure by results. As engineers go by the results you get. And you just need a couple inches of rain, suddenly flooding. Same places flooding over and over and over. The truth is it is not that complicated to put things in place to solve it. And if you were to talk to the civil and the structural engineers and the people who are actually the drainage engineers, I can give you a whole list of people who can give you the needed solutions off the cuff and show you how it can be financed and how it can be implemented. For some reason, we continue to have the same problems over and over with the roads, with drainage, with so many problems that need to be solved.
You mentioned the importance of the National Building Code, something I know the BAPE has been pushing for since the 80s. Do you have suggestions on the table so far?
Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let me secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another, get vibration. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function. Remove outdoor objects. Make sure that you're went to the ATM. Stock up with water. Make sure you clean the guttering lot. What about canned food? Make sure you got some stock up in your room. Make sure you prop up the paling and tie down the roof. Let me start to prepare real soon. Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let me secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another, get vibration. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function.
You mentioned the importance of the National Building Code, something I know the BAPE has been pushing for since the 80s. Do you have suggestions on the table so far?
We have, Lisa, we have solutions on the table, and not BAP, the Barbados government, under the leadership of no less a person than the Prime Minister. I mean, we were so impressed. When she came back from Bahamas, it was after Dorian, I think it was. And she was so motivated by the need to be proactive that she actually gave a commitment that we have to have that building code in place by the beginning of the next hurricane season. And I must tell you, I was impressed by the efforts that she made to put in place. Her ministry, along with a team from the town planning department, put on a series. They actually undertook the exercise of redoing the new Planning and Development Act. And I must tell you, we were part of the development team, and we part of the stakeholder team that actually followed the whole process and assisted and all that. We were terribly impressed with the process. I mean, we were not happy with all that they came up with. You understand that? We are always unhappy about something. I guess that's what engineers do. But the process, totally impressive. And the results, on time, meaningful, a major step forward. The legislation was done. BAP was part of the process from the beginning to the end. And we were not happy about everything. But that is the nature of negotiations. Unfortunately, when the new Planning and Development Act was announced, one or two people were not happy about a few things. We could have said that too. Maybe we were part of the process and we could have said, well, we're not happy about this and we're not happy about that. All it needed really was proper education of the persons who were unhappy to explain why that was done, why this was not done, what the compromises were. Public education. And let's move forward with the legislation. But what we have done instead is just not do it. And the net result is that we are back where we were for the last few decades. Where in terms of building, I mean, you can put culture in all kinds of terms, but to a large extent, people who build in Barbados can do what they want. There's a building code. I hope you know that. Mm-hmm. The National Standards Institute have in place a building code, which is a quite impressive building code, which was done according to standards. I mean, they had teams together of experts who sat down and went through all the processes and put this code together over many years. It's an impressive document. The problem is, it is voluntary. You do it if you feel like. So that what tends to happen is that you're building a building, or you're building a house, or your friend wants to have a house inspected. The building code will say, if you're going to build this house, it needs to be built to these standards minimum. It needs to be inspected by this person who confirms that it's been built to those standards. And then when you're finished, someone will check to see that you actually have put something in place that is an asset to Barbados. It's not going to put your life in danger. It's not going to endanger your possessions. And it's going to be there as an asset for many, many years to come. That's what the building code, and these are standard systems all over the world. In Barbados, a builder can say, hello, I have to pay another $1,000 to do that? I think not. Mm-hmm. Just do this, finish my house and let me move in, please. Mm-hmm. And so said, so done. That may have been fine 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, when we were at that stage of development. But we're past that. We have now reached a stage where there need to be a societal approach to standards. If you're part of a community, in many ways, you have to conform to the norms of that community, to the standards of that community, and we have to bring everyone along. And sometimes to do that, you have to set standards, minimum standards. This is done all over the world. That's what the building code is. And there's no reason why Barbados should be behind the loop in something like that.
But minimum standards are relatives. So what are minimum standards? What are the minimum standards?
They're actually not relative. They're very, very specific standards. So basically, the code is a collection of standards. So for example, if you're going to build a house, there are standards for the kind of foundation you need to put in place, depending on how many stories and what the weight and all that. And the civil, and these are all calculated down to the very specific standards. And these are all documented. So if you're going to build a house and it's going to be this size and it's going to be this location and this is the kind of foundation you want, the building code will give you very specific guidelines as to what is safe. Now you can exceed those. So if you need to use concrete of a certain strength and you want to use more expensive, stronger concrete, that's fine. But you can't use weaker, less expensive concrete that is going to compromise the strength. So it sets minimum standards. See what I mean? But they're very specific standards. And for the engineers and the builders who will be building the house, they're very, very meaningful guidelines. So they know exactly. So even now, if you go to an engineer to build a building for you, the engineers know the building code. And typically, as professionals, they will conform to the building code. However, if you are the one paying the engineer, and you say to him, I am not prepared to pay for that, just give me that, he has no choice. And I can tell you, Lisa, one of the most wasteful things in Barbados is the costs associated with sick building syndrome. And typically, the cause of sick building syndrome are people building large public buildings and putting cheap ventilation systems in up front without proper design, without the proper consideration for the public use, without proper consideration for ongoing maintenance. And then 2 years down the road, they're compromising people's health, the value of the building, the integrity of the system. So you save $1,000 up front, and then you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars refitting, retrofitting, having people sick out, having people actually sick. And again, the building code sets the standards up front. It may be painful up front, it may cost you a little bit more than you would like to spend. But in the long run, it saves you so much that it really is not funny.
But let's look now then at some of the errors homeowners make, from the foundation to the roof. What's a good foundation?
A good foundation is one that is designed by a professional who understands the complexities of building a foundation at that particular location in those particular conditions. So if you're doing it on the beach, in the sand, it's a completely different scenario to if you're building it on a hill, on a valley somewhere, or you see what I mean? So it is not something you go and look in the book and see, there's a foundation, I'm going to put that there. That's why you go to a doctor, for example. You don't feel well, you could say, well, I knew a fellow who had a pain in his hand and he took some of these, so let me go take some of those. You wouldn't do that because your health is too valuable. So you go to a doctor who understands these things, and he understands that your pain is different to the other fellow's pain, and he is able to use his knowledge to say, no, this is not what you need to take. This is what you need to do. That's what an engineer does. So if you're going to build a house, he's going to look and see exactly where you're building it, what you want to build it for, how you're going to be using it, where it's going to be. He knows what the potential threats are. And then he design, even things that you don't know about, he will know about, and he will actually design all that. So that when you're finished, you have a house that you can depend on. So the first mistake that most people make when they go to do complicated things like building a home or investing large sums of money in infrastructure is not seek professional advice.
So that's the foundation element. But let's look at doors and windows. How significant is it to look at those things?
Or if you're talking about disaster preparedness, that is probably probably more significant than foundations and maybe even roofs.
Really?
The major areas of weakness in many buildings is openings. So what tends to happen is that when the winds are during the high winds, if you just need a loose window or a loose door, and many people don't understand the violence of hurricane winds. As long as you start to get vibration and flapping, in short order, that you will have metal failure or material failure. And once you have an opening in the overall envelope of the building, either a window or a door, then this whole storm force comes into the building. And then the pressure, that's where you get problems with the roof. Then where you call the pressure from inside the building tends to now provide upward force on the roof. And all hell breaks loose. So actually, a weak point in many buildings in a hurricane is windows and the doors. And one of the areas of preparation that is well worth considering, like just before in response to a hurricane, so this preparation, which is like the day before, you go and get your supplies and all these things because you know it may come. When you know it is imminent, like a minute before, there's the time to actually nail windows shut if possible, put shutters up as securely as possible. Because when you lose a window, that is the beginning of losing the interior, the roof, and therefore the rest of the building. So windows and doors are critically important in terms of structural integrity. And that's something that people need to understand, and we need to talk some more about so that people can actually take preemptive action.
Are there any particular types of windows or doors that people should possibly look at?
There are too many to generalize. They're all kind of windows, but we have to be careful that we're not buying windows because that's what the neighbor have and they look really nice. And
Most of the time, that's what people do.
But again, this is where professional advice, people who've been there, who know who've been to Dominica and been to Bahamas and seen what works and what don't work. This is where that kind of advice is actually valuable and worth a couple of dollars to have. So windows and doors, absolutely important.
The roof.
Same. What we tend to do in Barbados is we look and see what the neighbor did. And we said, well, that looks good. I'll take that. Which is fine. I mean, and to a large extent, I mean, the truth is, if your neighbor goes to an engineer or architect and they build his house and it looks good, the architect, typically the problems that the architect solve at that location, if you live next door, I mean, if you copy, you will end up with a good house. I mean, but the truth is, if you're taking that kind of risk and you're going to be spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, why would you not spend the extra $8,000 or $10,000 to guarantee that your investment of $600,000 is going to be worth $1 million 10 years down the road and not be a major liability? And that is what, the truth is, when you hire a professional to do this, even if something goes wrong, you can put him in court. You can actually hold him level because the way he is trained and the experience that he's got to allow him to call himself an engineer, and the fact that he's part of an association like BAPE, where there's a code of ethics, and there's a way he has to behave, and where he have peer group that can actually call him to account, that gives you an assurance that you have invested your money wisely. So it is like going to the doctor. Going to an engineer or to an architect or to a building professional, it gives you the kind of assurance that you get when you go to a doctor, because you know something is not right, and you have a professional assess you and give you a reassurance of what is not right, what you need to do, and how you can keep it right in the future.
I want to stick on the roofs for a second. Are you seeing any errors being made in some of the roofs you're seeing constructed?
But you can't ask that to an engineer, because obviously I would say
you will
yes.
always see errors.
I will always see errors. In many cases, people like roof. Like, I think the roof, people see the roof as an attractive thing. Even some of our architects. I mean, the roof is something that allows you to make your home unique and attractive and all that, and that's fine. But as you well know, in a high wind situation, the roof tends to be a major point of vulnerability. So that if you were to go to a structural engineer for a design for your roof, the considerations that he is going to bring to bear, you may not even like, because he is a fellow who would have been to Dominica, for example, and they tend to do that. So they will go to Dominica after to see what failed. So that obviously it's just like that building that fell down in the US yesterday. I mean, that is going to be swarmed now by all the construction experts in the world, trying to understand what went wrong, so that they can make sure that never happens again. And that is what experts do. So when you hire a structural engineer or a civil engineer, you are actually paying for a high level of experience, not only knowledge, but experience of what could go wrong. So he would do things to your roof that you may say, well, so why would he possibly do that? But it's because when he was in Dominica 2 years ago or 3 years ago, he saw that this was a weak point where many of the roofs that failed at that point. And the ones that did not fail had this particular feature. So he puts that feature in and tell you, well, it can cost me another $200 to do this, to buy some of these and put these in, but trust me, it's worth it. That's the kind of reassurance you have. So my suggestion to anyone building a roof in a place like Barbados, where you could possibly be faced with 100-mile-per-hour winds, would be to have an expert have a look at it, at the design. And once you've got the basic structural design right, you can do all the fancy things you want afterwards to make it look in whatever colors you want and all that. But the integrity, structural integrity, is the main concern of the engineer.
Do you think there's a need perhaps to go back to that chattel house type style roof? Because they've been standing for eons.
Well, there may be. But the truth is, I think Barbadians have made the decision of the kind of houses they would like to live in. And a significant part of how you develop your society must be response to the desires of the actual people. I think many Barbadians associate child houses with the old days that we want to move away from. But in terms of strength, the main asset of the structure house of the child house is the ability to move it around. You probably weren't around in the days when there was a regular thing on Sunday mornings to, you're just going to take down a whole house and move it to another. But that don't happen that much now. So, but the child house was a good feature for its time. But I suspect that we've actually moved past that phase now. So we can build stronger houses now, but the problem we have in Barbados is that not having been tested for such a long time, even when we build the houses that are supposed to be strong, they may not necessarily be even as strong as the child house, which is the point I think you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And we have seen in some countries where the concrete houses with the fancy roofs that we have now are the ones that actually suffered really, really badly, whereas some of the old child houses remain standing.
I was about to ask that question because I'm seeing a lot of homes now being built with concrete roofs.
Oh yeah, well, concrete is really an excellent building material. I mean, it's long-lasting, it's resilient, it's difficult to work with because it's heavy and all that. We do have a set of houses in Oxnard, for example, that were built with concrete roofs, and I think they were there from that would have to be like the 70s. And when last I checked, I mean, I have not seen any significant problems there at all. The only problem I've seen is that many of them the owners seem to have put an extra metal cladding on top. But one of the problems with concrete is when you pour, you tend to get some persistent little leaks if it's not properly sealed. So a roof itself is not the integrity of the roof, but if you get lots of rain, you tend to see drips of water coming through. And I think some of the homeowners probably to solve that problem just put another metal sheet over it. But the roof itself it has significant integrity to the overall structure. It kind of holds everything together. So whereas a wooden roof can tend to be a point of weakness, if you build a concrete building and a concrete roof, I mean, what you're building then is a really strong enclosure that the roof adds strength to the building.
All right, let's look at ties versus straps, or ties and straps.
Okay, well, that's actually a question for the structural and civil engineers, the people who do that on a day-to-day basis, and the building people. But it actually makes a big difference if you're actually going to tie these elements together. In all the cases that we have seen where there were visits to after serious hurricanes, what they tend to do is go and assess and see what failed, what worked, and what didn't work. And it's been found that when the joints are properly strapped and properly tied together in specific ways, it makes a significant difference for the roof to survive severe wind pressure. So what they tend to do is, you notice that the hurricane straps now have become almost a standard for building. This is just from post-hurricane assessments that demonstrate the value of just adding a simple strap or tie and actually tying the roof to the frame and tying the roof elements together with straps. It makes a significant difference. It's not terribly expensive. Some of our engineers really love to go around and to point out how insignificant the additional costs are in terms of the additional benefits you get from these methods of reinforcement. And people like BRC, and they have been promoting the use of these straps. And I actually think that Barbadians have been taking it to even retrofitting, so that even if you've already got your roof, it is possible to go back now and actually strengthen an existing roof so that you mitigate against potential future damage.
I know I'm dwelling on the roofs a lot, but...
I noticed that.
Yeah, but screws versus nails.
Well, screws are always better than nails. The problem with the difference, of course, is the tools that you have. So the old carpenters still have their hammers and they're not prepared to buy those fancy power tools and all that where you have to do the screw. But the screws are... Personally, I prefer screws. I mean, it's easy. It's easy to you can actually remove them very easily. They actually hold better. So I prefer screws to nails, but I'm sure not everyone will agree with me.
Let's look at the fact that I find a lot of Barbadians focus on the cosmetic changes of the house versus fortifying the property. Are you seeing that a lot?
Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let me secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another against vibration. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function. Remove outdoor objects. Make sure that you went to the ATM. Stock up with water. Make sure you clean the guttering lot. What about canned food? Make sure you got some stock up in your room. Make sure you prop up the paling and tie down the roof. Let me start to prepare real soon. Let me begin preparations. It's hurricane season. Let me sit down and reason. Let Baby, secure a nation. Know your shelters, Bajan. Help out one another, is equation. Develop emergency community plans so that we could function.
Let's look at the fact that I find a lot of Barbadians focus on the cosmetic changes of the house versus fortifying the property. Are you seeing that a lot?
Oh no, and we expect that, and I would suggest to you that that's why we have engineers. It's so that most people do not understand the value of what goes on behind the scene to make the house strong. Mm-hmm. So typically you want to buy a house, what you really want is you want to open the door and go in and flick the lights come on, and you live happily ever afterwards. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. So there need to be people somewhere that who worry about the structural integrity, the weatherproofing, the fact that it is going to be safe for you and your family to live in that place for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And that's where the building professionals come in. My concern is that the people who are interested in the beauty of the houses and impressing their neighbors as to how nice their place look, are not paying enough attention to the structural integrity, and they're not paying enough attention to the exposure they face from potential hurricanes or wind or rain events or water events. And this, I think, is an opportunity for government to put something in place. I think our society have reached a level now where it must be mandated that if you are going to invest $500,000 or even $100,000 in a place to live, that it be of a standard suitable to protect the lives and well-being of you and your family and your neighbors. And I don't think that should be optional. I don't think a person should be able to say, man, I want to save $2,000, so I'm not doing that. And especially in a situation where the person doing that may not be the person living in the house, mm-hmm. because you may be a landlord or you may just be a builder doing it on behalf of somebody else. So you may want to take shortcuts. The purpose of a building code and of establishing national standards is to make sure that the integrity of all construction is at a minimum level to protect life and limb. That's actually what engineers are all about. BAP came into being, the whole registration act, the whole registration of engineers in Barbados came into being because there was, because of an accident at the garrison sometime after Davis Cup tennis match, I think, where a stand collapsed and a large number of people got injured and all that. And it's only then that we actually started to pay attention to the structural integrity of public things that we built in Barbados. Unfortunately, I don't think we've actually updated the act since we did that. And it's definitely in need of update. This is another thing that we have been lobbying for a long time. I mentioned the fact that there's a large number of very highly qualified people in Barbados who can be engineers by international standards, who can actually operate at the level to make a difference to lots of things in Barbados, and who currently are not doing that because of deficiencies in our professional registration act. And this is something that we have been lobbying for. This also ties back into the whole question of disaster preparedness, the use of actual human resources that we actually have on the people that can be deployed to solve many of the problems that we face in Barbados, who are currently doing jobs that are way beyond their capability. So you go overseas, you come back with a degree in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering. This is actually a special qualification. Engineers are problem solvers. The biggest problem we have in Barbados, is lack of problem solvers. I mean, we make some beautiful plans in Barbados, some outstandingly impressive by world-class standards. I mean, let's start the Barbados, the renewable energy plan, 100% energy mm-hmm. by 2030. Mm-hmm. That is actually world-class. There's no other small island anywhere in the world with that kind of ambition. We make beautiful plans. Our problem is that we don't really do the things. Yet we have the human resources available with the training to do these things and to do them to world-class standards. But we don't have the systems in place to support these people doing these things.
You keep stressing the importance of engineers, but let me give you an example. I had a friend who was looking at taking over a house, and they saw a small crack in the wall. They spoke to the bank, and the bank said, you should probably look at getting a structural engineer. They contacted one, and the price was prohibitive.
So they should have contacted another one.
I think they did. And the price was also prohibitive.
Right. Okay. So well, that's possible.
And that's a concern.
It is, and it's a concern for us too at BAP. And let me tell you what the concern is. And I like to talk about systems. It's not the engineer's fault. Probably that engineer. Look, I like to compare it to this. If that person, if the bank has suggested that that person had a pain in their stomach and they go to a doctor, they would have gone to a doctor and they would have known. A doctor is a full profession, a medical professional, and they would have known that the fee is going to be between $100 and $120, $130. They would have known that. Why would they have known that? Because there is a system in place in Barbados that if you are not well, you go to a doctor. Because if you're not well, you can't go and tell your boss you're not well. So you stay home, you have to go to a doctor. The system in Barbados mandates that. If you need to get medicine, you have to go to a doctor. If you need to be referred to the hospital, you have to go to a doctor. If, however, you're going to buy $1 million house and you see a crack and you want to get advice on that, there's nothing that says you have to go to an engineer. You can go and ask your friend, or you can just look at it on Stoops and just go and buy the house, which is what most people do. So the 1 or 2 people who are smart enough to go and ask an engineer, if they came to me as an engineer, on what basis would I charge them? I would probably look at my normal fees, and I would say, well, this is what I normally work for, and that's going to, I have to drive down there, they have to do some calculation. $1,000. Take it all, and the truth is, that is because of a lack of a system in place. Now, if the engineers operated, if there was a building code, and you had no choice but to have your house inspected, engineers would be just like doctors. There would be hundreds of engineers offering that service.
So the rates would be cheaper?
Absolutely. Even cheaper than doctors, I would suggest to you. Because engineers are like that.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. So as we go further into the hurricane season, your advice to Barbadians in terms of getting their homes prepared, specifically?
Okay. So this is specifically the reason our advice to Barbadians. There are 4 levels of hurricane preparedness. The first was mitigation, which is long-term preparedness. But there's also the something called preparation, where you know a hurricane season is upon you. There are some things that you actually can do. The same straps that we spoke about. It is possible to actually retrofit your house, even if it wasn't built up front to be hurricane resistant. You can actually have your roof retrofitted. You can actually have a contractor come in and actually do some work for you so that your roof now is far more resistant to strong winds than it was before. Water is another serious problem. You can actually make sure that the drains around your house are unblocked, that there's a clear path for water to run, not through your house or not through critical parts or not through the foundation. So I mean, there are a number of things that, and the good thing about, one of the good things that we would have to congratulate Barbadians on, and Barbadian companies especially, is the number of ads from companies at this time talking about things that Barbadians can do. Like in Paul do it quite a lot. I heard like some of the hardware stores talking about things you can actually put in place to protect your water systems, your food, to protect your pets. So there are a whole range of things you could do. What you must not do is just toss your hand in the air and say, well, we didn't have a storm last year, we didn't have one the year before. The one the year before that was nothing. What could happen this year? Because that is what worries us. That level of complacency, because the day after the storm, one of the things that we have been saying recently at BAP, we are not in the funeral business. We are in the proactive business. What you need to do before. After the storm, it's total chaos. That is not the time. You don't want an engineer, then you want mop-up crews. But there are many things that VP can do before. But the things that we would really like to see done are the mitigating things, the systems, the building code, the even like drills. So that, I mean, we haven't spoken about hurricane shelters, but since there are so many, as we saw from the little small event just last week, there are so many people who can lose their homes during a small event. If we were to have a serious hit, there are clearly a large number of people who will need a secure place to be during the event. Now, this is something that needs to be done on a national level. And I know it is done. I know there's a centers committee and all that. But I must tell you that we at BAP, we are not happy with the level at which that is done. Because if you're going to be now encouraging large numbers of vulnerable people to assemble in one area, it becomes even more critical that the integrity of that particular venue be protected. Now, we feel that there need to be a significant level of professional input in assessing hurricane shelters. If you're going to be inviting people to leave their home and come to this place during a potential storm, I think whoever is giving that invitation needs to take particular care to make sure that such venues are carefully assessed and upgraded if necessary to protect the lives of those additional people that you're actually going to be assembling at that point. And the truth is, we cannot get away from those kind of assemblies because we recognize there are large numbers of vulnerable people who have to find somewhere to go during a difficult event.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. That was Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Brown, the president of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers. I'm Lisa Lord, and this is One on One.